but of our viability to be more and more successful in the land of Israel. And the second part, which is a spiritual rectification that has to take place, is to amend the law of return, to make sure that, as opposed to what is stated now, that if converted, you are immediately welcomed as a citizen of the state of Israel, but as the Rebbe demanded and fought even within our own religious rabbis and leaders who wouldn't step up to the plate, that it has to be amended to state the word kehalacha, which means that conversions only based on halacha, on religious law, will be afforded the right of the law of return. Those two things, I believe, are the most important things for which have not been taken care of, for which we are suffering now.
Well, Rabbi, you're now the king there now, so tell us, what would you do with this situation there? To this point, right now Israel is plagued with this problem.
Well, immediately against what the UN would say, and no matter what pressure other countries would put, I would hope I would have enough fortitude. Again, you never know, because once I'd be in that position, I may become like one of the current leaders. But if I had enough fortitude, if I could assure myself of that fortitude, then I would immediately move to take back all of the West Bank, all of Judea and Samaria. What I would do with the Palestinians, I don't know. I wouldn't have enough time in one day to take care of that. But it's a good question what would be done with the Palestinians living there. But they definitely would not be given citizenship. And if they were individuals that were undermining the situation, then they would have to be removed and relocated.
To? Any ideas?
There are many Arab countries that they come from. Perhaps the best idea would be Jordan. Jordan is 60-70% Palestinian. That's really where they come from. Let them go back to their real home. And maybe we'd even give them some money. We're just not going to just, over the years, how many Jews have been forcibly relocated by Arab countries, and not only were they forcibly relocated, they were forced to leave with all of their money behind them, left to the governments in those Arab countries. I would be willing to ask or to move them to relocate back to their own country, and even give them the money for what they've spent on their land that they were there for.
Sounded like a little bit like Rabbi Kahana.
A little bit. I'll tell you something, Rabbi Kahana was way ahead of his time, quite frankly, in certain issues. And I won't deny that. I'm not saying that maybe he was perhaps a little too rabid sometimes. But if done with enough, with enough intellect, and if done with enough patience, you can work that out. But the main thing is we have to take back what we had, and make sure that it remains with us, and that we have the necessary buffers to protect ourselves from our enemies.
What would you do in the current situation with Lebanon and Iran and Syria in this combination?
Lebanon for sure we must take that certain buffer necessary to first of all eradicate all the pockets of terrorists that are there. That has to be done. That has to be taken care of. And if they're hiding amongst civilians, then the civilians should be given a choice very clearly. You either get up by this and this time, or we're letting you know you're taking your life into your own hands. That's fair. We have an obligation, as I said before, we have an obligation to protect ourselves first. That's only fair. The UN doesn't like it. That's too bad.
Iran. They're right now feeding monies for reparation in Lebanon. Syria, throwing some military armor. They just confiscated some.
It's a good question.
What would you do to these two countries who
it's
are
a good question.
aiding and abetting
Right.
these terrorists?
It's a good question. I would not venture, I could not tell you offhand right now whether the right thing is to go to war with them. It's not that simple. I'm not going to say that that's necessarily the right thing to do. But one thing is definite. We must definitely be on guard. We must definitely be aware or beware and not fool ourselves. That's for sure. And if it is necessary down the line and we see that the danger is becoming quite imminent, unlike what happened during the time of Golda Meir, where during the Yom Kippur War, where the Jewish people almost lost the state of Israel, if not for God's miracles that gave us the victory of the Yom Kippur War, that should never be allowed. And in other words, we should never get to that point where we're put into such kind of danger. We have to be very vigilant, no doubt, and when the time, or if the time comes, and that the military can tell its government clearly that we are in a dangerous situation unless we take matters into our hands, then whatever has to be done has to be done. I just don't know if that's where the critical point is right now or not. I don't claim to know these things.
Would you authorize as leader the release of the nuclear bombs if Iran decides
You
to...
mean Israel has nuclear bombs? I didn't know that for sure.
If
Are you
it
telling
had
me something
nuclear
new now?
bomb... If
Are
it
we
had
revealing
nuclear
this now
bomb-
on this show for the first time? If they had you.
If they had...
Assuming that they had.
assuming
For the
Would you-
purposes of discussion.
discussion,
Okay.
would you authorize such preemptive attack?
I will
in
be
the
honest with
event-
you, I wasn't ready for some of your questions. You were asking some very, very, not only to the point questions, quite frankly, but a little dangerous, these questions. It's a good question. I would hesitate to answer you on such a thing right now. It requires a lot of thought. It's obvious if Israel is going to be destroyed, if you had a mass movement, moving against Israel, and the only way they could defend itself is using its nuclear arsenal, they may not have a choice then. That's obvious. I mean, you have to protect your... you're either going to die because your enemies are going against you, or you're going to make use of the last resort that you have, which is to both kill your enemies, and then you'll have to accept whatever consequences comes later from the world body for using that. But at least you're alive. So obviously there comes a point in time, if God forbid ever necessary, that yes, that's obvious. I'm assuming most logical people would come to that conclusion. Is that the time, or should that time ever come, or is it on the horizon? I don't see it right now. Hopefully, God willing, it should never come to that point. We're hoping that should always be the last resort, obviously, to ever have to come to that point.
I want to introduce you to the nation of Israel, the Knesset, the whole entire Kalal Israel in the land of Israel. You're the leader. What would you say to the people of Israel in this momentous time which they're living, so much problems taking place? What would you say to the people? What would you say to the politicians? What would you say to those there and here and outside of Israel?
I think I sort of said it before, and it's nothing really mind-shattering, and I think it's what the Rebbe said, and that is, it's time to start loving each other. It's not a joke. This is not something which is, the Rebbe said it, and but it's more than just the fact that it may not be that intellectually incredible. The Rebbe said many great intellectual things. This was something that the Rebbe said, which was the Rebbe meant. This was not a joke to the Rebbe, and it shouldn't be a joke to any of us. And again, I believe that's the only thing that will be our saving grace, is the ability to really unify with one another. When that time comes, it'll be a different day. It'll be a different day. We've never really had that, and we're constantly fighting, and we're constantly at each other's throats. When we can learn to really look at each other in the eye, be there for each other, and just, like each other, be willing to smile at each other, to do a good deed for one another. Take it seriously. You don't need anything momentous, anything mind or intellectually earth-shattering. That's it.
To love one another.
That's it.
To the point. Rabbi, thank you for being on the show.
Okay.
To the point. If you have any questions, call us right now. The telephone's right there on the screen. Call that number. Send us an email. Let us know what you think about this program. My name is Moshe Otero, and we're here to the point.